So, what about today then? So, as we know, coaches in training, those of you that are interested in sort of the coaching community, coaches' mindset is about being curious. So, today's session, we're going to be sharing some insight and some information on just that. So, there are, as usual, going to be lots of insights, lots of ideas and tips to take away. So, please do make sure you have with you whatever media you need to capture any insights or learnings, because you're certainly going to want to do that. I've got my trusty book that it's just full up almost actually now at the end of this month. So I'm going to have to get myself another one. But you're going to have lots to take away today. Now, who is our wonderful guest today? Our guest is one of the Coaching Academy's brilliant training team. She delivers, you may have seen her on the peer-to-peer sessions or maybe on the coaching skills session. She also delivers our Wellbeing niche session, which she expertly led on Saturday. And also is one of my brilliant trainers on the Coaching in Education diploma. And that's, I think, where we originally connected with our love of inspiring young people. But I've also had the privilege of working with this amazing woman on projects outside of the Coaching Academy, where we've worked on projects of women, empowering women, looking at sort of that critical voice, imposter syndrome, sort of more sort of around how we use those sabotaging thoughts to our sort of detriment and how we can turn those around. She is just the most amazing coach. She's also the inspiration behind the incredible project called Coaches in Kind, which I hope she's going to tell us a little bit about today, a community interest company and project. And if you have had the privilege of being on any of Rachel's sessions, you will know how amazing this woman is. We share that passion for lifting up others, and I'm incredibly proud that she's a member of the training team, but also someone that I can call a friend and a colleague. So welcome, amazing Rachael Bushby. Hello, Rachael.
That was absolutely. I don't think I've ever had such a wonderful introduction. So thank you. That was very touching. Hello, everybody. It's so nice to see you. I can see lots of familiar names and faces. So I feel like I feel less nervous now. I feel like I'm at home. So thank you all for coming.
Oh, it's nobody else here, Rachael. It's just me and you chatting as we do so well.
True, Catherine. Is that true?
And Catherine, of course, yes. So I'm really excited about today's session because we've spoken before, haven't we, that, this is a real area of expertise for you. And I know, you hide your light under a bushel. You're a very modest, gracious person. But curiosity is something that you are focusing your studies on, where your PhD is concerned at Birmingham University. So maybe you could just start by telling us, first of all, a little bit about your journey to become a coach, because as you know, I'm always curious about people and their journeys. That's sort of really where my curiosity sits. But also around your inspiration for doing so, and then maybe we can dive in a little bit around your PhD studies.
Okay, of course. Thank you, Sharon. So I'll give you a very whistle-stop tour of how I got here. So I did my A-levels. I was all set to go and do law at university, and I didn't get the grades. And this is particularly pertinent today or this week, because this is clearing week, isn't it, for A-level students. And so quite a, it happens to a lot of us. We don't get our first choice, and we end up on plan B. And plan B turned out to work out much better for me. I'm not sure I would have cut it in the world of law. So I didn't go to Sheffield University. I ended up going to Birmingham University, which has also come full circle for me. I did medieval history and English at Birmingham. And then I did an MPhil course. So I started doing an MPhil in history, film and television. And about 6 months into that course, we all did placements. And my placement was at Coronation Street. And I worked on that soap opera, and I made the tea, and I was the runner. And I never went back and finished that course, because it was a really, really fun place to be. It was a great world. I had an amazing time. And I stayed there in Manchester for 5 years. And then I kind of thought, right, it's time to be a grown up and go back to what it was I was thinking of doing in the first place, which was I was thinking I was going to go into academia. Um, but I thought, actually, I'm going to I'm going to give teaching a go. I'm going to give myself a chance, because I'd said I wanted to be a teacher straight out of university, and I just hadn't had the guts to do it. I think I thought, as a secondary school teacher, I was going to be too close in age to the kids I was teaching. But by this point, I was 25, so I gave it a go, and I was an English teacher for 15 years in a secondary school, or two secondary schools actually. And then set up a company with a colleague called Dragonfly Impact Education, which I'm still director of. And within Dragonfly, we have a coaching philosophy that runs through, but we mainly train senior mental health leads. So most schools have a lead practitioner on mental health and wellbeing, and my company trains those via a DFE training route. So I coach within those programs, which is an absolute honour. And then also, literally today, my community interest project, Coaches in Kind, is going live. It's launching, and that is on a mission to bring coaching to schools. I'm really, really a strong believer that coaching cannot just be in these, corporate environments. It has to make its way to young people, and the only way to do that is to make it accessible. And so Coaches in Kind is an introduction service. It's like, Match.com for schools and coaches. It brings safe, quality coaching to schools. Coaches offer a little bit of affordable or pro bono coaching, and that enables those relationships to be developed. So that's the plan, and I really hope you'll watch that space in relation to Coaches in Kind. But also come and see me on my courses that I run for the Coaching Academy around mental health and wellbeing, around wellbeing niche coaching. We always have such a great time. Christina, I can see you're here, so you can back me up on that one. But I'm here today, aren't I, Sharon, to talk about my PhD. I'm not going to be able to give you many answers because I'm still in the wading through treacle stage of it, but I can certainly tell you a lot about what I've learnt about curiosity so far.
Wonderful. And the rich tapestry of your journey that brings you here today, I think, really really sort of cements what we're talking about today, that sort of curiosity around the fact that how can we empower educators and young people within schools to be better and to do better, and using that coaching approach is just so wonderful. So I will definitely be waving the flag where Coaches in Kind are concerned. I think it's just the most amazing project. So we are talking about curiosity.
Mhm.
So let's have a think, because we're all coaches or interested in coaching here today. And we talk about curiosity a lot as coaches. So let's rewind, because as an English teacher, words are subjective. So what actually is curiosity?
So that's a big question, and it's bigger than I actually thought it was when I first started. So curiosity has been categorized as an emotion, a motivation, a state, a desire, a virtue, a vice. It has not really got, and there's no real agreement on what curiosity is. So Aristotle said at the beginning of metaphysics, all men by nature desire to know. So I think an uncontroversial definition of curiosity would be the desire to know. but it was pretty much ignored by philosophy. So beyond that statement by Aristotle, curiosity wasn't really discussed. What was discussed was knowledge. So curiosity is a gateway to knowledge, but it's not an essential gateway. There are other ways we can achieve knowledge other than being curious. And so for some reason that nobody has really decided on, philosophy ignored curiosity for a long time. Psychology, on the other hand, has done a lot around curiosity, and so it's certainly in much more in the kind of eye of scholarship, I would say.
Mm. And it's interesting, you reeled off quite a lot of different words when I sort of asked you sort of around what curiosity is. And it was something that we started to sort of unpick a little bit before we went live, because we know again that people tend to use different words to describe traits and characteristics, maybe dependent on their gender or where they are in their life's journey. And I remember, as a child being called nosy, but I know that was curiosity.
Mhm.
So do you find that sort of quite a lot, that sort of in your sort of journey to really research curiosity, that maybe people look at it in slightly different ways, maybe depending on who it is or where they are?
Absolutely, and also it's had really bad press over the millennia. It's the church in particular has been at times, the medieval church, for example, was very suspicious of curiosity. The problem with curiosity is people ask questions and then they might find out answers, and they might be answers that people don't want them to know.
Yeah.
And so, depending on what somebody is trying to find out, will impact whether that curiosity is seen as valuable. So if somebody is trying to find out something somebody doesn't want them to know, they're more likely to be called nosy than if they're finding out something that the other person thinks is worthwhile for them to know. And so if we think about Eve, if we think about Pandora, if we think about Dr. Frankenstein, if we think about the cat, like
Yeah.
curiosity has had a particular, it has had bad press.
Yeah, and for me, as a coach, it's a core fundamental skill. So how do you see curiosity then in relation to coaching?
So for a client, I think curiosity is absolutely essential. So when you put yourself, when you decide you want to use coaching in order to move you towards whichever goal you're trying to get to, I think adopting a curious mindset is really, really important and really fundamental. The problem is for the client, I'm going to talk about the client and coach separately.
Mm.
Problem is for the client that if we're looking one way, we're not looking another way. So if we are focused on something that we're really, really curious about, but we're not focused on the other thing, then we're going to move towards the thing that we're focused on. So if we are curious and we follow our curiosity towards everything, then we've got that kind of scattergun approach, haven't we? So I think it's about, for coaches, it's about really directing our clients' curiosities towards their goal and facilitating that movement towards the goal. Because if we follow, you could spend all night, couldn't you, on social media following your curiosities, but is that moving you towards the goals that you want to achieve? Perhaps not. So yes, curiosity is absolutely fundamental, and we need to be curious about who can help us, what can help us, what resources we've got, what strengths we've got, all of those things that require us to have that desire to know. But it always, I think, has to be within the framing of our goals and our values as well. Do we value what it is we're curious about? Because in the modern age, we could find out a lot of things, but are we prepared for what we're going to find out as well? That's the other thing. So that's the
Mm.
client. And then the coach, yes, curiosity is important, but I think you always have to ask yourself the question, for whom are you being curious? Because if you're curious as a coach for yourself, then that could again move you away from the client's agenda. So that curiosity foremost is to facilitate the client's curiosity, not your own. So rather than a question like rather than starting a question with "I'm curious," what do you think about X? Just making it a bit more neutral. So being curious, what do you think? So it sort of hangs it in the air. It allows the client to pick up the curiosity, not to say, I'm actually really curious. I'd like to know, because it's not about you.
Mm. And that's so important, isn't it, when it comes to coaching, to ensure that it is about the client and not about you, as the coach. So, should we drill a little bit deeper there then, and maybe start thinking about benefits? So, what's the benefit of curiosity maybe to the client, and then maybe think about sort of the benefit of curiosity to the coach, or value, however you want to sort of frame it.
Hmm. So I suppose the benefit of curiosity to the client is that it's the way that you get from A to B, isn't it? It's the way that you it's the motivation that helps you to work out how you're going to kind of what you need to know to get from where you are now to where you want to be. And without curiosity, we don't get those new insights that we need, and all the research sort of shows about coaching is that whereas people naturally kind of reflect, people don't naturally get new insights on their lives necessarily. So that's what coaching does. It turns like reflection into insight. It gives you new perspectives that you wouldn't necessarily get either on your own or without those particular questions. And so curiosity kind of opens those things up. But what we know about curiosity and how it differs to something like interest is that it you have to feel it's achievable. You have to think that you'll be able to find out. So we're only curious about things that we might find out. We don't tend to have that kind of very intense feeling of curiosity if we never think we're going to know. So you do, as a coach, need to be really aware that for curiosity to develop, we need to be very clear about working on that reality where we are now, but also making the goal feel attainable. So if it's too far in the future, if it's too far away from what the person can ever envisage that they can achieve, they're not going to get those feelings of curiosity. They might be interested in things, but they're not going to get that drive, that motivation that curiosity provides. Because curiosity is I think it's a very mundane and very practical and pragmatic kind of trait to have. It's not like awe. So, something like awe when we go out into the night. So if anybody went out last night and saw the meteor shower and saw like things, flying across the sky, you can go out and watch that and kind of go, wow, and be awestruck and just be in that moment and enjoy it. And you don't need any more than that. In fact, for a lot of people, awe is about, that's bigger than me. I don't really need to understand it. I'm happy to just be here and experience that. Whereas curiosity, it's practical. We want to know. We want to find out the information. We want to achieve that knowledge.
Okay, so that all makes sense then. But there must be some pitfalls. What would you say the pitfalls of curiosity are?
So I think the pitfalls are some of the things that we've talked about. The pitfalls are potentially going too broad in our curiosities and not having like depth to them. So kind of like that scattergun that I mentioned in terms of being curious about too many things and things that actually aren't going to impact us, that aren't in relation to our goals or that aren't in relation to our values. So if I spent all day, every day, just, following my curiosities on the internet into all sorts of, topics that might pique my interest for a moment or two, then I wouldn't actually achieve anything that I need to know. And virtue ethicists, so these are people who say that curiosity can be a virtue, an intellectual virtue in particular. They would say that there are worthwhile forms of curiosity and non-worthwhile forms of curiosity. So it's a bit of a judgy one, that, isn't it? It's a bit of a judgment, like who makes that decision. So is it, is it worthwhile for me to find out the names of Henry VIII's wives, but not the names of Jennifer Lopez's husbands? So who makes the who makes the call about what is worthwhile to find out? And I suppose when it comes to our own lives, the only person that can make the call about what's valuable to our own lives is ourselves. So that's why we have to be really careful as coaches not to dictate the curiosity, not to take the client down the road of this is what we should be curious about, this is what we shouldn't. It's like when the lovely Chris Robertson used to talk about the Hercule Poirot moment. When we hear what we think as a coach is the most important thing, and we can't, we're like, aha, you've got it, type thing.
Yeah, no, totally right. It's a really, really good connection there, Rachel. So let's talk a little bit more then about coaches and curiosity. So I think, obviously we could talk about sort of, the ins and outs of curiosity, but I'm really keen to sort of bring it back to coaching.
Mm.
So let's talk about you have started to sort of dip your toe in the water in this. I really want to start peeling the layers off this. So how do we use curiosity effectively? Let's start right from scratch when it comes to goal setting.
Mm. So I think when it comes to goal setting, we need to be curious about values. So obviously this is the client's curiosity, and there is a bit more I'd like to say shortly about how a coach uses curiosity, but we'll come back to that. But for the client, in terms of goal setting, it's about being curious about your values, about the things that matter. And so if you've done the PPD and you've done Pam's day on values and beliefs, and you've used the values elicitation, tools like that are really, really important, I think, to be curious about what's important to us, because it's different for absolutely everybody. And we have those sort of ideal values, but we also have our operational values. And so being curious and being open about and not judging ourselves about those. So for example, I could tell you that one of my one of my values is the environment. I could say, like, I really value the environment. I feel like we should do this, this, and this, and I work towards it. And then you could say, oh, but this is not true anymore because I've now changed my car. But before that, I drove a diesel car. So obviously there was some value at work that was more important than that ideal value, and that was an operational value. So that operational value was probably something to do with security or safety or financial, there's something else going on there. So I think we have to be really curious about what we think is motivating us versus what actually might be motivating us. So setting goals around who we want to be, very much so, how we want to live, but also realities of what is really driving us. Because if we try to work against those things without fully understanding them, then we'll struggle.
And that's really interesting, isn't it? The whole sort of ideal values and operational values that come into play there. And if you have done Pam's day on the life coaching to play more on values and beliefs, you will know what we're talking about. If not, then it will all be revealed when you do that session with Pam. Important to start. Kelly, else do we need to sort of bear in mind then where curiosity and goal setting is concerned, if anything?
So I think, certainly the goal has to be our own. I think this is from the client's perspective. So I think, being curious about where our goals come from is also really important. So we might have a very long entrenched goal that comes from another voice in our childhood, for example, a parental voice. We might have another voice in our life at the moment, which is suggesting quite strongly that we do something, and that might be coming through in our goals. And sometimes as a coach, I know this has happened to me, I've worked with clients where we've got right to the end of the session and then we're at the commitment side in the W, in the kind of way forward, and you suddenly realize that there isn't that commitment there. And sometimes that's because that goal isn't their own, it's somebody else's goal. It's
Yeah.
something they think they should do. And so being really curious around, where the goal comes from, what makes this goal so meaningful to you, is a really good question to get in quite early, because you might find that it's not.
Yeah, yeah, very powerful and really helpful, Rachel. So you mentioned about values elicitation.
Mm,
What other tools can coaches use to harness curiosity?
mm. I think the biggest one is silence. When you stop talking is when the coachee, the client, is more likely to become more curious. So really kind of just allowing that space. We and certainly, and obviously you're the expert in disc, Sharon, but certainly for people who might be quite high C within their profile. So for people who've not done disc yet, these are people who take a little bit more time in order to process their thoughts and feelings. And so just enabling, that time, that space. And there is an argument that curiosity is actually a facet of personality rather than something that's particularly malleable. So if you've heard of the big five theory of personality, or ocean, so these are the kind of openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion and introversion, agreeableness, and then what used to be called neuroticism, but is now tends to be emotionality. Those aspects have quite a strong evidence base behind them to suggest that they're not overly malleable. They can be changed through mainly through goal setting approaches, but actually there's elements of that that are quite static, quite stable over our lifetime. So elements of our temperament that are pretty well established. So my supervisor put it really nicely yesterday. He said it's like we're born with the canvas and we can paint on it, but the canvas will probably stay the same shape and size. So within openness to experience, which is one of the big five, depending on the model, because there's been various ones created, but depending on the model, curiosity is one of those things. So some of us might be more naturally curious than others. That doesn't mean we can't develop it and we can't work on it, but some of us might be more naturally curious. I also think that it's probably an evolutionary thing. I think that we've had to be curious because it's
Yeah.
kept us alive. And that's what you see in animals and small children. They're naturally curious. I
Mm.
forgot the question, Sharon. Sorry.
It makes perfect sense, whatever everything that you were saying. We were talking about harnessing curiosity and how, as coaches, we
Yes.
can do that using different tools. But yeah, no, it makes absolute sense. And to be mindful of that, mindful of the silence to allow our clients to go deeper, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And
beyond
sorry, go.
science then, tools wise,
Hmm.
so I mean, I love wheels of life are wonderful, because that just is harnessing. This is kind of, it's harnessing that intrapersonal curiosity, that looking within the self. So a lot of curiosity operates within that kind of the realm of the inner self. So we're helping somebody to access those aspects of themselves, the way they see themselves, the way that they value themselves, all those sorts of things. But also a really lovely tool, my favorite tool, I think, is the iceberg. So this idea that there's things that we see on the surface, there's things that we do, behaviors and those sorts of things, but then it's working out what's going on underneath in every situation, and the things that we don't see. So I love sketching out an iceberg and when I'm sort of working out what's going on above and below. And we always know that the bit below's a lot, there's so much more iceberg below, isn't there?
Oh, totally. One of my one of my favorite tools, actually. I just love the iceberg of human behavior, and it's what we don't see is the coachable area, isn't it? That's the values, the beliefs, all the motivational drivers, and the life experience, and all of that stuff, judgment and bias, and it all sits below the surface to make up the rich tapestry of who we are as human beings. So there's quite a few tools that you've mentioned there. And I guess a little bit like curiosity, there will be some of us as coaches who will maybe feel more comfortable sitting in that space of silence and holding it for our clients. And there'll be others of us that maybe need to work on that a little bit more, to give that space to our clients to really sit into that silence, but incredibly powerful area. When we talk about tools, sometimes we can get a little bit caught up in, if we're not careful, falling into maybe a directive way of coaching. So how can we facilitate curiosity, maybe using some tools or not, or whatever, but just doing it in that pure coaching, non-directive way?
Mm. I suppose that's how you kind of frame the tool. I think if you introduce a tool that has a lot of content in it, so if you kind of have a tool that has a lot of suggestion in it about what you might be feeling, then obviously there is still an element of direction in there. Whereas if the tool is content free, completely content free, and it simply is a way to support people to access different ways of thinking, then from my perspective, and I think this is arguable, but from my perspective, that is still non-directive coaching. It's not adding the content, it's not telling someone how to do something. It's opening up different avenues and different ways of thinking about something. It's promoting curiosity ultimately.
Yeah, it's a real skill and a core pillar, of being a really good coach, is to holding that curiosity. And you mentioned about sort of personality traits and things, and you spoke about DISC. So if we think maybe that can potentially impact on how curious people are, and maybe some of that is nature nurture,
Mm.
can people learn to be curious, whether they are, I don't know, way, or have sort of had it modeled to them, or not? What's your thoughts on that?
So my thoughts are yes, and there's more and more research around this, around goal setting and around motivation, that suggests that it can be learnt, and that it's possible to learn. And I think it's about um, really sort of highlighting in a non-threatening way the gap, between what people know and don't know, because curiosity is a really vulnerable place to be. It's actually saying, I don't know. I don't know this, and a lot of the time we spend our time trying to make out that we know and that we know everything, because when we've got knowledge, that protects us, I suppose, doesn't it? It gives you this bubble around you. And so when you're curious, you have to say, I don't know. I'm actually ignorant about the knowledge here. And that's quite it's quite an exposing position to put yourself in. So I think in order to be curious, we have to be brave and say, I don't know the answer to this, but if I find out the answer to this might move me towards where I want to go. And actually, maybe not knowing this is what's stopping me from getting to that place I need to get to. And depending on the level of challenge, which I always think it's really important to ask our clients to what extent they would like to be challenged, depends on how you would phrase the question. So, if I said to somebody, what might be helpful to know in this situation, that's quite gentle. If I say to somebody, what don't you know in this situation, that's quite confrontational in a way, isn't it? But for some people, for kind of a high, a high D, somebody who's really driven and wants to get to the crux of the matter, that second question might be more appropriate. Whereas for an S, for me, I would find that question, if my coach asked me something like that, I would be quite taken aback. It would take me a minute to kind of go, what don't I know?
And that just goes to show how adaptable we need to be as coaches. And I was talking about this last week, actually, on the DISC module. You know, it's about using our tools, and I was talking about DISC at the time, to ensure that the session is a good session, not for us, but for our client. And so you've just demonstrated that beautifully around, okay, so if you and I were working together, you know, we have very different preferences when it comes to the DISC profiles. And so if we were in a coaching relationship, with the knowledge of that, I would be able to reframe maybe how a question that wouldn't phase me, and reframe it into a way actually that is really supportive of you to go deep and to be curious.
Yes,
Uh,
absolutely.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Cool. It's just amazing. So tell me, Rachel, what I'm quite interested about is, of all of the things you could have done research and a doctorate on, why curiosity?
Um, it's a very good question. I think it's because I'm really, really interested in well-being. So I'm really interested in, and I'm very much an advocate of a move towards education for flourishing, for human flourishing. And there is a movement. So the team I work with at the University of Birmingham is working with PISA. So PISA are the big kind of assessment kind of organisation, and they've always like assessed countries in terms of academic subjects. And for the first time, and it's kind of a human capital model, so it's around economic achievement. But now they're starting to say, actually, what education needs to do is help people flourish, help them to be good people and live good lives, and do good things in the world. And so that's something that I'm really passionate about. And curiosity, I think when I spend I spend a lot of time looking at my dogs and what they're doing, and with young children. I've spent like decades looking after young children, and those two creatures share the sort of they share curiosity as something that seems to like bolster their well-being. So I really want to know whether curiosity bolsters well-being. And I'm not so much interested in scientific curiosity. I'm interested in social and emotional curiosity. And I think for us, as going into the next phase, what this world has in store for us, I think we need to be curious about one another in a way that is humble and a way that is compassionate and empathetic. And I think we need to teach young people from a very early age to be open and curious about each other in a non-judgmental way. And so I suppose my research is whether there's anything in those gut feelings I have, or whether they're just wishful thinking.
I'm sure there's lots in there. Knowing you the way I know you, Rachel, I'm sure there is a lot there that is, uh, although it's not backed up yet with any research, I'm sure you will find it 100%. Um, Rachel, it's a really, just the whole topic is fascinating and so broad, and I'm sure we've just really just scratched the surface. So, as we're starting to come to our sort of last sort of 10 minutes together, what sort of particular area of curiosity would you sort of like to really raise to the people that are listening today?
So I suppose the area we've not talked about that I think is really, really important is the intrapersonal curiosity of the coach. So it's about being curious about yourself, because we all go on these training courses, and I even deliver them, where you say, we have to be non-judgmental. Well, I think that's really difficult, isn't it? As a human being, I think if we were a robot, that would be all right. But being non-judgmental, when we are constantly making judgments, and that's what we do in like that keeps us alive. We have to make judgments about every situation, whether it's safe, whether it's enticing, all the things that we have to make a judgment on, to then go into a coaching situation where, as a coach, we are told to be, we have to be completely non-judgmental. I think that's really difficult. So I think what's better, or what's more achievable, is to be really curious about your judgments. So when you make a snap judgment in a coaching session, which will happen, and I think we need to admit that we all make judgments, that we then go away and reflect on that, and we are curious about where that judgment comes from, because the likelihood is it's not coming from what that person has said or their life. It's coming from something that we have experienced ourselves, or a decision that we've made about something. And just being aware of that and kind of working through that and opening our minds up to other views and other ways of thinking about it, I think is more helpful than just saying be non-judgmental, which personally I think is impossible.
Mm. And I just to reflect back, just to see if I've understood, it sounds like what you're saying almost is that we can, as coaches, we can use curiosity in our all important reflection post sessions to maybe shine a light on some of our own blind spots, some of our shadow areas, which allows us then to be curious about what's triggered that for us and to embrace that and grow and develop even more as a coach. Would that be a sort of a correct assumption of what you have just said?
Absolutely. And then I think we come across that view again, or whatever triggered us to make a judgment, because we've thought it through and because we've seen it from different viewpoints, we are more likely to be non-judgmental of it. We are more likely to be open-minded about it. And so there are things that I think that we should make judgments about, and there will be lines that as coaches we decide we're not going to cross in terms of what we hear from our clients, and I think that that's fair. But most of the time we are displaying that unconditional positive regard that Carl Rogers talks of, and so we do need to work on that, I think.
Mm, mhm. I'm going to close off in a minute by asking you to sort of share a top tip. I know we've sort of gone down the route of the area that we haven't had a chance to dive into, but we've had such a rich conversation. But there's a little comment just popped into the chat box, which just sort of has piqued my curiosity, and I wonder if I might put you on the spot a little bit, Rachel. And it says, would it be difficult to be both curious and fearful at the same time?
Well, Mary has maybe been doing some research on this topic, because she's actually talking about something that's really key for curiosity studies. So there are two theories about why we're curious, two main theories. One of those, well, sorry, if I talk about epistemic curiosity, this is a type of curiosity that humans experience. So not like animals where they're just sniffing about and find things, but in human curiosity, there's two main reasons that theorists think we're curious. One is to avoid pain, and the other one is to achieve pleasure. So Mary's point about fear, actually, fear can sometimes be the driving force behind curiosity. So curiosity and fear can go hand in hand. The other type of curiosity is the curiosity that is where we are trying to find something out. We might be just looking for something to add to our lives, whereas the former, the deprivation model, is where we don't know something and we need to know it. We feel like we need to know it, and anxiety is driven by that kind of curiosity. So curiosity kind of has two guises there, I think. Hope that
That makes total sense. It's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Rachel, before we finish, have you got a little top tip that you can maybe share that maybe would be really helpful for coaches and coaches in training to incorporate either into their everyday personal or maybe professional lives as a coach?
I think this is more kind of just an into your life, generally. I think it's really, if you feel curious, I think it can be really interesting to ask yourself and this is not a really coachy question, is it? But ask yourself why you're curious. um, what is making me curious about this? And we find out some real home truths, I think, about, so if you are spending hours on social media finding out about celebrities doing this, that, and the other, what is it that's making you curious about that? What is the driving? What is your value there that maybe you can find out more about? So our curiosities are kind of like signaling to us what it is that we're missing, perhaps.
Mm. Love that. Because we are our first client, right? So if we are working on ourselves constantly, because we're a work in progress and we're never finished, that's going to help us to be an even better coach, by embracing that and finding out a little bit about what is it that's causing us to be so curious about that thing or that person, or whatever it might be. Rachel, it's been absolutely fascinating. Where can people find out more about you?
So I hang out on LinkedIn a lot. So that's I'd love to connect with people on LinkedIn if you're on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram when I remember, but LinkedIn is the place.
Oh, wonderful! So do take time to connect in with Rachel on LinkedIn, and you can find out a little bit more about her and what she does with the Coaching Academy there as well. Wonderful. Well, we are coming up to the close. Before we do, I'm going to ask you all just to think about what today has been for you. We're into the what so what. That's really been my sort of like my driving force this year. What and so what. So the what has been the discussion of curiosity. So what has it been about for you? So I'd love you just write down for yourself, so an action point or a key takeaway, so that what has today been about for you guys. Feel free to share it in the chat box if you would like to. And before you do go, Catherine's just going to share a very quick poll, so we get a little bit of an idea of how today landed with you as well, because we like to get some feedback from you all. And then I look forward to seeing you next time around with the lovely Ronnie Fraser. We've got the old scaling questions. 10 being it was a wonderful session. We really got lots out of it, and obviously one not so. So please do take the time to fill in that before you leave. And lots of love coming in from you for you, Rachel, and for the session today. Thank you so much. I know you're a really busy lady, and with the launch of Coaches in Kind, I really appreciate you taking the time to share your love and passion. Will you come back and talk about your doctorate when it's finished and your
Yeah.
research has been
If you're still
published?
doing it in 15 years' time or whatever.
Well, I'm not planning to go anywhere. Thanks very much. Thank you, everybody. Look forward to you joining me next time. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Thank you for joining me today.